Hi and welcome to another wrap up. This is going to be a really chill one because it's Saturday and I just feel like talking about books. I thought this will be a quick and fast wrap up because I felt like I barely read any books this month. But look at this stack. This is all I read this month, and I also read half of War and Peace. So I clearly have underestimated myself, but also I should say one of these books, or two of these books, I think. I started in February, but still, this is a lot of books. I did not expect that. So I have, let's see, 3 fantasies, 2 historical fictions, 2 non-fictions, and of course I need to talk to you a little bit about War and Peace. So I will do a little War and Peace update before we get into the books that I've actually finished. I'm sure if you've seen any live shows or any reading sprints and you have heard me complain about War and Peace. I'm reading War and Peace together with Rosen and Charlotte for Rosen's book club. And it's been an experience so far. I'm filming a vlog for it. You will get my whole thoughts for it in that vlog. We also have a live show for War and Peace. So if you're reading along, then do check out Rosen's channel because the live show will be on there, I think at the beginning of May. I've read the first volume. For most of it, I was quite bored. I'm still fascinated. I still want to finish it. I've taken a little break and I do think about it quite a lot. I think now I've gotten to the point where I know the characters, where I dislike some, like others, but I also think that these characters are just characters that are a little bit of both. They all have their own character arc and don't really think you have very clear heroes and villains, and I'm enjoying that part of it. Volume 1 ended on a high note. Definitely a lot of things happened, so I cannot wait to read volume 2. I did discuss it with Charlotte, and I think the event that for me was at the end of volume 1 for my edition is for other editions at the beginning of volume 2. But if you've read it, then I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm actually quite excited to read the second volume. The writing is fine. It is a Tolstoy approved translation, so that is the one I'm reading, and I am dwelling with the translation, so I'm happy I chose that one. But I'm listening to the audiobook, and sometimes I'm listening with the audiobook and reading at the same time. Let's start with the historical fiction. So I read for the Hobbitses book club The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi, and I gave this, I think, 3 or 3.5 stars. The thing I like most about this book is that the writing is gorgeous. So we follow our main character called Hiram Walker, and he is born into slavery. His father is his master and his mother was sold away when he was young. We meet Hiram Walker when he travels together with his brother and they fall into the river. And Hiram survives, we know, because we follow him throughout longer periods of time. I love the writing on a sentence level. I didn't really feel very engaged with the plot or with the character. I felt like Hiram as a main character was incredibly bland. He felt a little bit like a plot device or device to tell a story that the author wanted to tell. The events in this book are definitely very interesting. I think the basis of Hiram, his life, is very interesting, with him being biracial, and there is a magical realism part as well, which is a very small part, but I did like it when it became a bigger part because it really played within the themes that you can see in this novel. But overall I just kind of missed something. I missed the engagement on the character level, and I kind of feel the way the plot was written was very dry. Even though there are so many very eventful things in this book, that kind of felt a little bit strange to me. On a writing level I would give this a 5 star because I think Ta-Nehisi is an incredibly talented writer. On all the other parts it was really a 3 star. I watched Sarah from Sarah's Puzzles, her vlog on this, and she talked about how the author mainly wrote non-fiction before this, and then it kind of started to make sense to me. I will link Sarah's vlog down below because she says some incredibly interesting things about this book. I finished this book for the 24-hour readathon, and then I wanted to read another book, and I decided to read a book that I had recently picked up from a bookstore, and that is Medusa by Jessie Burton. This is a Greek myth retelling from Perseus and Medusa, and if you kind of know the myth, I knew a little bit because I've read, I know, can you see the Stephen Fry myth books over there, which I absolutely adore, but he talks about them as well, but more in a traditional sense. There's this gorgeous statue as well of Perseus having beheaded Medusa, and he holds up her head like this. That is kind of the context I had, but Jessie Burton tells a very different story. We follow Medusa as she is a teenage girl who lives on the island with her sisters, or her sisters visit her. We do know of Medusa that she was punished by Athena for attracting the attention of Poseidon, which puts Athena in a really bad light, and this book also puts her in a bad light, and we get a lot of Medusa's history. This book doesn't view her as a monster but more as a victim. This book somehow feels like a play because you get the interactions between Medusa and Perseus. They talk to each other with a wall in between because Perseus cannot look at Medusa because then he turns into stone. And their conversations are absolutely beautiful. It's greatly paced, it's greatly written, it really flows, it's a really fast read because of course I read it in a day. It's great for beginners as well, I think, when it comes to Greek myth. And I do love a Greek myth feminist retelling. I gave this 4 stars. This was great. I don't think it will stay with me incredibly, but it's something that I would very easily recommend to a lot of people. Okay, let's talk fantasy. The first fantasy I finished was Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. This is the first in the series and it's kind of low fantasy where we have our contemporary day, but there is this witching world or witching society. Let me show you the map and you can kind of get a feel of what that witchy society looks like. I really like this map. I listened to the audiobook, which I would highly recommend. One of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. We're set in the UK and we follow 4 witches who all have their own perspective, and later on in the novel we really get to know their very individual personalities as well. I love low fantasy like this. I love low fantasy that is witchy. So we have those 4 amazing characters who some have chosen to live in the non-magical world, and Helena, who is the head of the coven of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. I loved the writing in this book. It felt so natural. It was so emotional and personal to read this novel, especially when we get to the main part of this book where we meet Theo. And Theo is a teenager. Theo is perceived as very dangerous, and then of course our main characters get involved somehow. This book had some great discussions on trans identity, but also on feminists who exclude trans identity. To its core, it is a fantasy novel, and the way it ended, I was so upset. So upset. I don't want to say anything. I was very upset about this ending, but I still pre-ordered the second novel, which comes out I think in June. But if you're a fantasy reader or if you really like witchy things and if you like contemporary fiction, I would recommend this. This is so much fun. And also heartbreaking, very easy to engage with. I think I gave it a 4.5 star. Yes, 4.5 star. Because of the ending, I docked half a star. Otherwise I think this would have been a 5 star because I honestly had such a good time with it. And then, believe it or not, but I finished a book series. I finished the Broken Earth trilogy. So this month I read the Obelisk, which Sarah picked for me during TBR board, and I decided to also just finish the third one because I had forgotten so much about the first book, which is called The Fifth Season, that I had to watch a whole recap video on who all the characters were, what the rules of this world were. This world is called the Stillness and it is way far in the future, and the environment has gone to shit because there are a lot of earthquakes that cause seasons, and in these seasons it's really hard to live. Animals have adapted in a way that you cannot really hunt them. People live not in cities but in combs, and it's just a really hard life with really strict and disturbing rules. In this world you have people who can somehow control the elements. They are called origins, and our main character that we meet in the 5th season is an origin, but these people are really shunned by people who do not have that ability and are called stills. We meet that main character, and in the first chapter of the 5th season, so the first book, she finds her son dead and her daughter kidnapped by her husband. A lot of things happen in the first book. The first book got me really invested in the characters, and these books are mainly explorations of the world and getting the plot going. I think a lot of people have said that these books are not as good as the 5th season, and I would agree on a character level because I wasn't as emotionally invested with the characters as I was in the first book. We do get introduced to a new character in this book, and that character is from the whole series. I think maybe this is my second favorite character. Another character is my favorite character, but I cannot mention them because that would be a spoiler. So just the new character that we are introduced to in this book is my second favorite character. I really enjoyed them. There's definitely more to discover in the series character-wise. What I really enjoyed about these 2 books were the expansion of the world. There is such an interesting exploration not only of human behavior, also on human behavior towards the environment, and in this book the environment has a behavior towards humans as well, which I found very original and very interesting, and I was gasping, especially during this one, because we get to know so much still about this world, about the Stillness. in the last book. This whole series is just a discovery. I think I gave this one 3.5 stars and this one 4 stars. This was definitely a little bit of, I enjoyed it, but it was a bit of a middle book. This book gave a little bit more satisfaction and I rated it as high as I did the 5th season. This series is definitely worth reading and finishing if you've only read the 5th season, which I feel like a lot of people have. But I do think it's kind of important that you're interested in the world and the world building and discovering more about that, because that is, I think, kind of the core of these 2 books. I did also read 2 comics this month, one for the readathon and one because I just wanted something else. And I decided to read, I think, one of the most beloved comics called Saga. This is set in a fantasy world. I think it's high fantasy. It's also sci-fi because we have different planets. We have different races of magical creatures and people. And there are even a robot race, which is really fun. I think the pacing and the plot of Saga is really interesting and I like that. The art is also interesting. It's very sexual at points. I think the art works for the story. It's just the dialogue I could not get along with. It was so sexist and also very cringe. Just that part, you know, where the writer tries to be like cool, but it just sounds cringy. The women in this series are like the epiphany of women written by men. I'm not going to discuss everything because it's disturbing and like, let's keep it a little bit PG. But yeah, I gave the first one 3 stars, the second one 2 stars, and I'm just gonna DNF the series for now. If you like Saga, like, good for you, but I don't see the appeal, to be quite honest. And then, for Feminism She Wrote, we read A Woman of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, and I filmed a whole review of that. I will link it in the description down below, so I will not talk a lot about A Woman of One's Own right here, but I did read it this month. Really enjoyed it, was a 5 star, got so much out of it. Well, just watch the review if you want to hear me talk about A Woman of One's Own. A book I have been reading for a long time, over 2 months I think, and I finally finished it, and that is The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich. Ooh, this was translated by Richard Bavar and Larissa Volansky. I also listened to the Dutch audiobook, who I don't know who translated that. So this is about the writer who had a lot of contact with a lot of different Russian women and their experience about the Second World War. It's just very fragmented, where we have different stories and we see all the women and what they did during the war and their experience. Some are a little bit longer, but usually it's around a page. This is a lot. It is a lot. I do like the way the book is built, because we start out with women who wanted to enlist, then with their experience during the war, and then their experience after the war. All of which is equally interesting and equally heartbreaking. I found it very interesting how different it is from things that we read about men or the way men talk about war. I think these women were way more focused on their own personal experience and were way more aware of what was happening in the moment than maybe I was used to reading, because these women remember such horrible and odd details. It's very different from person to person. I think because it's an oral history and these are just documents of individuals, you can see a lot of glorification, because who doesn't want to be portrayed as a hero? And that is kind of part of this, where women are just very proud of the fact that they were part of something, but you can see that some women don't really feel that anymore, and that they just remember what it has done to them over the decades. And those are of course the most heartbreaking stories. One of the most surprising things, which I think I'm just not used to read about the Second World War, is that all these women really wanted to enlist. They really wanted to be part of the war, and I think maybe that was kind of part of Russian culture at that time. I think these women did a great job at themselves exploring their own hate towards Germans, towards their enemy, and how that hate is being fed by the fact that their family members have been murdered, and especially nurses talking about having to take care of Germans, saying that they started out with so much hate, but that they understood that a person is just a person and someone is just in pain. Something that I found very painful is that a lot of these women got very emotional talking about this, and some said, like, my husband told me what to tell you, how many battles we won, how our strategies worked and things like that. But that is not something that these women focus on. They focus on what their day-to-day life was like in the trenches, where they got their clothes, whether or not they were able to wash themselves. There's one bit about women talking about the fact that there was nothing for their periods, and that when they were marching, the blood would just run down their legs. Things like that, it's way more interesting than the military facts, which is something that this book really focuses on. I find it really hard to talk about this book because it was really hard to read as well. I think writing this book is an incredibly great and necessary endeavor, and I wish more people would do it. Also from my own culture, because I only know what the men did in Dutch culture during the Second World War. And I wish more people would write documents like this. I cannot promise I will read them because this did a little bit of a number on me. That's why it took me so long, and it wasn't pleasant to read most of the time. But I'm so glad that I did, because it really has changed my perspective on what a society did during such a horrible war. Maybe not the best note to end on because it's so sad. These are the books I read in March. As you can see, barely any of these were on my actual TBR. But it's fine, it's fine. I am catching up, probably. I did have a good reading month though. I didn't think I had a good reading month, but looking at this, I think I had a great reading month. If you've read any of these books and if you agreed or disagreed with me, then please let me know in a comment down below. For now, I hope that you have a lovely, lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!